Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. Меня зовут Сабир, я являюсь генеральным директором Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. И сегодняшний вебинар наш посвящен теме корпоративного управления. Сегодня будет предоставлен синхронный перевод для всех, кто не понимает по-английски. И сегодня с нами спикер – это профессор Люда Вандерхейден от ведущей школы мира INSEAD, которая находится во Франции. И модератором сегодняшнего вебинара будет являться Наталья Бачинская, директор по развитию Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. Передаю слово Наталье сегодня. Спасибо вам большое.
Коллеги, добрый день. Очень рада присутствовать здесь вместе с вами. Очень рада вас приветствовать. Спасибо, что присоединились. Сегодня наш вебинар посвящен корпоративному управлению. Это второй вебинар в нашем партнерстве с Бизнес-школой INSEAD, которая является номер один бизнес-школой в мире по версии Financial Times в сфере именно кастомных программ. И мы делаем этот вебинар в преддверии нашей совместной программы с INSEAD, Chapter Zero Kazakhstan и INSEAD, посвященной климату и корпоративному управлению. Мы назвали эту программу как климатическое путешествие в корпоративном управлении. И сегодня мы в конце вебинара расскажем вам о том, что в этой программе мы планируем вам дать, вам показать. Мы хотели бы представить сегодняшний вебинар, который будет посвящен введению в корпоративное управление по версии бизнес-школы INSEAD. Сегодня порядка 30-40 минут у нас будет часть, которую проведет уважаемый профессор. У нас есть сессия ответов на вопросы, и мы бы, конечно, очень хотели, чтобы вы задали свои вопросы. Люда очень просил нас эти вопросы собрать, и чтобы мы могли действительно быть полезными. Я хочу сказать, что Люда имеет очень большой опыт, очень большой опыт в управлении и очень большой опыт в работе с государственными компаниями на Украине. Поэтому ему так интересен Казахстан. Поэтому, друзья мои, давайте приветствовать. И so, Luda, glad to see you here today. Let's begin.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm very pleased to be speaking for the second time on the subject of corporate governance. And I think we're going to do a quick introduction of what corporate governance brings, why it is important, and also maybe answer any questions you may have. I think I'm interested in Kazakhstan a little bit same as I'm interested in Ukraine. I joined Ukraine in 2017, and I co-created the Ukrainian Corporate Governance Academy. That brought me on the board of basically Naftogaz, which is the biggest gas company and oil and gas company in Ukraine. And I am very convinced as a European that a lot of the new energies will come from the eastern countries in the European Union. I think countries like Poland are playing an increasing role. Scandinavian countries are very important. And I also think that Kazakhstan is of course much more east, but is also oil rich. And I think it's very important in my view that we also link with these countries, not in the typical colonial way, which is extracting resources and extracting what they have, but actually integrating them in sort of the world order, which of course cannot necessarily just be a world order dominated by one side. And unfortunately today, there are lots of cracks being shown in the world order, which is we're not uniting. But it will be interesting for me to hear what the viewpoint is of Kazakhstan. So with this introduction, I have understood a little bit late that the two businesses that were founded by my grandfathers, one was liquidated, which is basically closed, and the other one was sold, but way too late. And the key issue I understood late is that the issue is not that execution was bad, but that governance was bad. And that is the topic that I would like you to keep in mind. So governance is the other side of the coin from execution. And I think that is the important part. And for a long time, always people said, you know, it's all about execution. It's all about execution. And now we're changing the picture because it's not just about execution. It's also about governance. And to finish my introduction, the worst thing that could happen, which is great execution of a bad plan. So if you do great execution of a good plan, then you are value creating. If you do great execution of a bad plan, then you do great value destruction. So this is, I think, just to highlight that governance is an integral part of business and is not just something that is a legal requirement, but it's an integral part. And that's what I want to focus on today. So with this, I will ask Natalia to flip the, thank you, Natalia, to flip the coins. I will try to keep my comments to at most 30 minutes. I know you are sacrificing, and a good lecture shouldn't be a sacrifice because I think it's late for you. It's the beginning of the afternoon for me here in Switzerland. As you will see, this is the view from my house in Switzerland behind. So this is not fake news. This is actually a real picture. It gives you a little bit the impression of where I speak from. And today, actually, the picture is not right because snow fell for the first time. But also from the Switzerland and from the mountains, of course, you can see climate change very quickly. Switzerland has lost 40 skiing days, you know, in the last 30 years, and that, of course, is the immediate consequence of climate change. Also here in the summer, the farmers bring the cows to make Gruyere cheese, and 2 summers ago it was so warm that they had to bring the cows back at the end of August, which is roughly a month and a half before the normal coming down. The third point, of course, is the glaciers. The glaciers are melting. This is important because one of the big glaciers of the Diableret here is gradually drying out, and we have seen this. Same thing in Everest, of course, and same thing in Mont Blanc. So basically, climate change is real. It's not fake news. And I think this leaves me with a final introductory comment, is that the problem of climate change is a problem of governance, which is we keep executing. CO2 emissions are only growing. And so we are actually moving backwards instead of actually solving the problem. And this is worrisome, particularly with the presidential change in the US, which is full denial. In that sense, China is now, as a big country, one of the leading countries on climate change, partly because they realize how impacted and how real it is. And to finish, of course, why corporate governance? Because corporations are the key actors in climate change. Most of the impact of climate change is certainly on the environmental issue is through corporations, because governments typically work through organizations and work through corporations, and so that leads us to corporate governance. So the corporate governance has a major part to play, and that's why, you know, it's very good to see Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. Because I think not a single company can solve the problem. This is at the level of the industry, and then, of course, at the level of a country with regulation, at the level of a region. Presumably, European Union is actually doing rather well because all industries talk, and then they finally commit, and they commit with the approval of the politicians. Natalia, I have lost the slides, I think, so if you could show them again, that would be good. Thank you. So we have three topics. The first one is what is governance, and then what is corporate governance. What's important is not just governance, but what precedes it. Is it business governance? Is it corporate governance? Is it a national governance? Is it the governance of the earth? So governance is a generic. It's family governance, governance of a family, and of course it's IT governance. You can have functional governance and many slides. So let me start with what is governance, then I go to corporate governance, and then I will actually share why this is so related to democratic governance. And that will be my third point. So let me start, Natalia, with the next slide. And governance, you all know, it's about steering. It's the captain of the ship. By the way, very often the admiral of a fleet is not steering wheel, it's the first mate, it's the COO, or it's the assistant CEO. The chairman of the company or the admiral is rarely on the steering wheel. So, of course, gouverneur comes from the Greek. It's about directions, controlling, and it's, of course, changing course. That is very important. It's also what governments do. There's the same very related name. And this is because the culture of governance is very much the culture of authority and responsibility. So the culture of corporate governance is related to the culture of government. The two subjects are very intimately related, and I will explain why. And my third point on this slide is that it's not just governance that matters, it's what kind of governance. It could be project governance. It could be like the Silk Road, for example. That's a project, that's a program governance, and governance is very important for a good execution and a good implementation of the Silk Road project. So with this, if I can go to the next slide, then I will go here. This is actually Nelson. I've studied Bonaparte and Nelson, the Bonaparte Wars a lot. And so this is just giving the content using the ship metaphor or the captain metaphor. It is first direction setting, which is where do you want the ship to go? Second one is, are we prepared to go in that direction? That is preparing for the voyage. It is monitoring the progress and trying to see if there is a storm ahead, which is if there's a storm, maybe the ship should go in the harbor. If you are convinced that there is a storm, then changing course. It could also be that instead of bringing the cargo to Singapore, you think you might go to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, or to another harbor in Malaysia or in India. And then finally, very important corporate governance is settling the accounts, which is people get paid. And if the business has been well done, then everybody benefits. This is a very important notion that a company, a corporation, is actually a collective good. It's an institution, and many people benefit from this. I will come to this very, very shortly. And then finally, there is also engaging the stakeholders about shall we continue, which is we've invested in this boat. We had a share of the boat. This is where shareholder comes from. We hold a share of the boat. And then at the end, when you get your money back, actually most executives, most companies don't want to give you money. They prefer you to invest in the next boat. And so that is the final act, and that closes the cycle and starts a new cycle. Now, I think very often I've had the question, next slide, Natalia, please, show me that governance pays for itself. And here, I think what's important is not to sort of say, does it pay for itself? For me, the more relevant question is how costly bad governance is. And I will have some examples. GE, General Electric, which was a huge company, I think failed because of governance. And the key message I have for you is that people are not necessarily bad, that sometimes there are people who commit fraud, but people do things that are not correct. And the order or the plan is not good. And that is the issue of the governance. So owners and directors, this is what, with some colleagues, we've written a book about, is owners and directors have an integral part to play in value creation. And the way they play their part is through governance. So it's actually linking owners, shareholders, and also directors, board members to the executives that, the topic comes alive. So how do you destroy values? Well, you choose the wrong direction, for example. You actually go in the wrong direction. As a company, you might actually buy a wrong plant. You might actually make an agreement with a wrong business partner. You might actually start this is typically in acquisitions, you might acquire the company, but you're not prepared to integrate the company, for example. Secondly, you think you're doing well, but in fact, the accounts are fake. So this is not good. You're not also changing opportunities. Sometimes it's better to sell the firm when the owners do not have the cash, the means, or the will to continue growing the firm. And then finally, you're actually ripping people off because you're not giving them the benefits of the investments. This is you actually, I remember one company, InBev is a beer company. I don't know if it's certainly active in Russia. I'm not sure it's active in Kazakhstan, but it's a Belgian company. And they bought Anheuser-Busch, which was the biggest beer company in the US, and they became InBev and was the biggest beer company in the world. What the Belgians realized is that the company had 52 airplanes. And why did they have 52 airplanes? Because the executives love to fly in airplanes. That, of course, is misusing the company value for your own good. And that is, you could call it mercenaries. You could call it, diversion of funds, but it's diversion from the purpose. And I think that's very, very bad as well. So these are some examples. Yes, Natalia?
I have a question.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Now the question is, can I answer it? But we'll see.
Okay. What is the main difference between governance and management?
That is exactly what I'm going to talk about. But the difference is, management is like governance is generic. So you have to manage the owners, you have to manage the board of directors, you have to manage, if you're a bank, the regulators. So everybody has to manage. But governance is what I've defined here, which is actually, giving a direction, preparing for the voyage, it's monitoring the progress, it's deciding to change course. So it's basically making the big decisions about what, why, and with what, how the business is run. And I prefer the dichotomy governance and execution, because management, you have to manage a board, you have to manage your owners, so everybody has to manage. So management, I think, has become a synonym of execution. But it's, for me, execution is very clear. You have a project, build the factory. That is actually execution implementation. You could call that management. But the other side of management is deciding to build the factory, deciding to go from thermic motor cars, which use oil, to electric cars. That is a governance question. So that's what I'm trying to say, and I will try to make this clear. But I hope this first answer is okay, Natalia. Is this okay? It's a very good question. Thank you for the comment. It's a very good question, because that's exactly what I want to say. Management can be either governance or execution/implementation. So I would call governance directing, versus execution implementation. And I would say most business books do not make that difference. Most business books, even GE, basically General Electric, which was one of the biggest companies at the in the second half of the 20th century, GE disappeared because of bad governance. But everybody was still executing relatively well. So great question. Are there other questions, Natalia?
Not yet.
But please ask questions. We'll make it more fun, and then it's basically led by you as opposed to led by me. So if we go to the next slide, this is amazing, because These are two early examples of bad governance. This was very important because it was the beginning of merchant shipping. It was also the beginning of Europe plundering the rest of the world. And you had basically the first were the Dutch, and then actually after the Dutch lost their war against the English, and then the Dutch were leading in the 17th century, and then the English started in the 18th century, especially after the Napoleonic Wars. So both of these examples are two companies that were very important, one in India, the other one is actually more across Indonesia, Jakarta, and the others. And both went down under corruption. The corruption of the Dutch East Indies companies was that the owners basically said to shareholders, you don't have to invest in one boat, you invest in the company, and then our company has 100 boats, and this way you don't have as much risk, which is we will manage the risk. But the problem is the board members, when a boat went down or was taken by pirates in the Indian Ocean, then they would say that boat belonged to the shareholders. When the boat came back, then they said, that's my boat. This is called trading on your private account. And that basically the company went down under corruption. It was very, very famous. It was nationalized. And this is exactly what happened in the financial crisis. And probably the biggest example of bad governance is the financial crisis 2008, which is that, you know, the owners, the financial institutions were basically investing in zero risk products. This is impossible. And finally, you know, all of this risk came out, and then we had the financial crisis. So these are two examples already in the 1700s. And then 300 years later, in 2008, we repeat the same thing and we don't learn. And I think that's very important. In governance is ongoing learning, and do not forget about past mistakes, because past mistakes may have caused bankruptcy. And so in a certain way, the memory of a company should be, you know, a governance issue. So next question. This is a more telling example. I will not go through much into detail, but Natalia, next slide, thank you. And this is General Electric. So you see General Electric being exponential until 2000, basically, and then it starts going down, and this of course is sort of 9/11, and you see a company going down, a little bit up, and then down again. With the financial crisis, and then you see this is a great example where if a company goes down over many years, that is a governance issue. That means the owners and the directors are not taking care of the company, because obviously it's going down. It's like a boat leaking. Eventually, the boat will sink. And here, before it sank, what General Electric did, which had many companies, is they sold the companies. And they went back to the beginning where was General Electric as a electric generating company, and they went back to power, and they became much smaller, and that is what happened at the end. So you have a series of CEOs, Immelt, Flannery, Culp, which are trying to save the company, and they don't save the company. Now, if a CEO is not good, then you should change the CEO. But if the CEO is the owner, or if the CEO is the chairman of the board, he's not going to fire himself. He's going to blame the market. He's going to blame other people, and then he will not be fired. So what you see here is Jack Welch. He's actually called John F. Welch, but Jack Welch actually was the CEO. He also became a director. He did very well, but he actually didn't take care of succession. Succession is actually a CEO succession, strategy succession, is I think one of the key governance issues, and obviously GE went down because of bad succession. I think another example of bad succession is, if you go to the next slide, Natalia, is something that you may know about. It's the Dieselgate, and this is actually fraud, which is the German engineers actually are very toxic. And they actually cheat on the emissions, and because of that, people say roughly, 800 people died every year in Europe because of this. And they were caught, and even when they're caught, they were lying. Well, that's a typical governance issue, that is good execution. The execution was the orders within the company was saying, shh, don't mention it, deny, and of course that created hundreds of billions, or tens of billions, no, maybe 100 billions of euros of damages. And that is why actually Volkswagen is now one of the leading electric producer. So two things. One is the real governance question was, if Volkswagen had tried this in 2010, Tesla would not exist, because Volkswagen, when they put their minds on it, they would have done very well. But they didn't go into electric. They only went into electric late because they had done such a mess with diesel. So that is actually bad governance. And then if I can conclude my attack on governance. Yes. Next slide, Natalia. This is where we are now: ESG, environment, society, and governance. And that is actually what led to Chapter 0 across the world. And the answer is, we cannot make profits just by polluting, because actually people think the earth is free, that you can just pollute and put stuff in the air. But now with CO2, we realize that all the CO2 which is going in the air is actually causing global warming. So that means that that basically the markets don't work, and that leads to climate change. We've seen this in California with Pacific Electric and Gas. It's now bankrupt because they basically weren't taking care of the cables. And also use of child labor, which most customers don't want. And that lead to trying to change the metric by which we judge the quality of a company, not just by the economics, but also by the impact on people, which is, are we making profit by exploiting the earth, by actually extracting resources from the earth that we don't pay for? Are we actually using labor, that is slave labor? The Middle Eastern countries are attacked for that, for using slave labor from India. And also, companies in retail have been attacked for using child labor in Asia. So this is what customers don't want. And governance is about making sure that the deal is correct, so that when you have somebody who buys let's say a Nike was the company, if you buy a Nike shoe, you actually pay for everything. You also pay for child labor. You also pay for the fees of the CEO. You also pay for the partners. So the customers pay for everything, and it shouldn't be an unfair deal where basically your shoe is made by things that you actually wouldn't pay for. Most people, if they had known, they wouldn't have bought Nike shoes, because they don't want to sponsor and subsidize slave labor. So governance is making sure that in a certain way business is clean, and that business is green, as opposed to black and in the sense of what I showed before, which is the toxic emissions. So if we finish the introduction, and I will ask for maybe Natalia if there are questions. For me, governance is actually, there's a picture missing here. Is there another one? Because there should be another picture. Natalia, could you go forward, or did it disappear? Yeah, so the picture is missing. So basically, governance is actually framing. This is a good box. So governance is framing and saying what you're going to do as a business, and then making sure that you stay within that frame, and that you're not lying, and that you're not cheating, and that everybody is aligned. That's the notion of the matryoshka, that everybody is aligned, and that it's not fake news, or that it's not fraud. So that is what is governance. And so for me, business is two things. It is framing the opportunity. It is framing the project. And that is governance. And then it is delegating the execution of the project to people. And I would say that is referring to your colleague who asked a question, that is called managing execution. So you have managing governance on one side, and then you have managing execution. And I think we now know that for a business to be durable, we typically need to have good governance. For example, what is the advantage of good governance? You're more sustainable. You take a reasonable risk. The quality of management is better. The culture is better. The respect for customers is better. So in a certain way, it's a little bit like hygiene. When you do an execution mistake, you see it immediately. When I appoint a bad manager or a manager which is not as good, that is much harder to see. So it's much easier to supervise and sanction bad management or bad execution than it is to sanction bad governance. And that is one of the key questions we're dealing with. So let me stop here and ask if there are any questions.
No, we haven't.
Aha. So the quality of governance is also the quality of questions, because if you're a board, you're too far from the action because managers execute. And so the way you understand is by asking questions. So, okay, let's then go to the next slide. What is corporate governance? Corporate governance is, as I said, it's about making sure that companies are responsible so that they don't abuse people, but that also when they create something like intellectual property, so like a brand, that other people cannot capture it from the company. So actually corporate governance is also about making sure that companies are responsible, they do no harm. And secondly, that you are free. It's about the freedom of the enterprise to carry out a project. And this is where corporations, by and large, in liberal democracies have done much better because people with money then have ideas and they can carry them out without the party, without other people taking the company. A great example is Jack Ma. Jack Ma in China. He was creator of Alibaba, one of the greatest Chinese companies. But then at some point, the government was not happy with Jack Ma, and Jack Ma disappeared. And this, of course, hurt the company a lot. And Jack Ma disappeared. He's now back. That is the interference from governance. And that is basically a lack of corporate governance. I myself have been fired at some point. This is public record. I've been fired from Naftagaz because I was against, with my colleagues on the board, I was against the appointment of a CEO by the presidential office, really by the government, because we thought this was not a great CEO. And then we were fired because the owner did not like our resistance. After 19 months, the government came back and said, actually, you were right. Could you come back? Because now the CEO has destroyed the company and we've lost trust in the CEO. By the way, all of this is public, which is why I can talk about it. So I think corporate governance has a lot to do with integrity, with a clean business climate, and also with respecting the freedom of enterprise, which is why, for example, in Russia, I'm afraid to say corporate governance is not a great topic because, of course, the government is too strong. And whenever the government is too strong and presidential authority is too strong, corporate governance has a difficulty because the president doesn't understand that corporations have their freedom and do not have to listen to the president or to the government or to the CIA or to whatever, the KGB or the special security councils. So if you want to have good governance country, you also need to be a more democratic country. If you don't give freedom to people and to enterprise, then corporate governance will not exist. And that is why I'm excited about Kazakhstan, because we need countries like Kazakhstan, to be even better countries than they can be, and also show the way that, businesses can be run, especially in the energy sector, in a way that doesn't harm. And climate change, of course, harms people. So if I go to the next slide, corporations, I think, comes from the notion of the Roman Empire. Why was the Roman Empire so strong? Because corporations and communities had rights, and this was defended by the courts. And so you had a lot of enterprise. People wanted to join the Roman Empire because then they could trade in the Roman Empire. So a corporation is an entity like a person, but it's not a person. It's a group of people. But it has the rights and responsibility of people. It is authorized by the state because the state controls the country. It is authorized by the state to operate through a charter. And then it has rights and responsibilities like people. You shall not kill, you shall pay your taxes, you shall not harm your neighbor, you should not steal. And the same applies to corporations. And that is very much the same as, that is very much the topic of corporate governance. Next slide. By the way, the other word is company, and company comes from Latin cum, which is community, and panis. So it's people who actually eat together. This comes from the Italian traders. They would eat bread together. They would share bread together, and then they would trade. So that's the name of company. So that makes, that reminds us that business is not a financial issue. It's first a people issue. So the code is the G20, but there are problems. The principles are absolutely good. And the first principle, which is strange, is that shareholders are not responsible for the company, and that, I think, is something I would like to explain a little bit. And let me go to the next slide. I still have a few slides, and then I think I will be done. There is a very strange arrangement in capitalism, which is that the shareholders have the supreme power because they define, they assemble, they become a company, and they put their money together, and they have a mission, they have a project. And then they appoint directors in order to implement the project. So you have owners, directors who are responsible for implementation, and then these directors, they cannot do things themselves, so they hire managers. So the tripod, or the trinity of business, is owners, directors, and employees. And what is important in capitalism is that the directors are responsible for the project, not the shareholders. So it's the board of directors who appoints the key people, who approves the strategy, who decides on the resources, who also decide to organize, and who also decide to pay dividends to the shareholders. Now, why is that? Why is it that not the owners are responsible? So the owners, when a company is bankrupt, the owners have lost their money, but you cannot sue them. You cannot bring them to court. But you can bring the board of directors to court. This is now starting, especially after the financial crisis, where basically we felt that directors were negligent, hadn't done their duty. And when you haven't done your duty, you shouldn't say it's okay, I'm sorry. There should be a sanction. And that led to the reemergence of the corporate governance practice in the West. In the East, it's sort of variable, but this is a complicated. East-West is a bit of a fiction. It's really the corporate developed word versus the government-led word, if you wish. In 2008, we had the financial crisis. Many people lost their money, and we realized that, in fact, the directors were negligent. So that actually reminded us that it's the directors that are responsible. And why is it that shareholders are not responsible? Because shareholders can be funds, can be other corporations. There can be 1 million shareholders. And so what society wants is a corporation that is responsible. And for a corporation to be responsible, there should be an entity which assumes the responsibility. And that is the board of directors. If you look at the slide at the bottom, you have the shareholders at the annual meeting coming together, approving the accounts. And of course, that is, these are too many people. A company should speak of a single voice, and the single voice is the board of directors collectively together. So let me go to what is the real challenge. And I will finish with that. I will invite you to come to the course to see how we solve the challenge. But the challenge is that the board of directors, or the governors, if you wish, are responsible for the company. But the company is a community of people. So it's owners, government, because government has taxes. It's, of course, customers who have products and pay for everything. Then we have executives, who manage a company. And we have partners who supply, banks and suppliers. And then we also have families, because the employees have families, and sometimes the company invests in a school, or invest in a play yard, or invest in a swimming pool, or like they do now, they invest in the soccer team, So a lot of people. So basically the company has many stakeholders, and everybody wants something from the company. So the real problem of governance is, how do I make sure that this community keeps evolving, given that perhaps I will actually leave some countries, I will close factories, I will close products. How do I govern a company so that the company is fairly governed and people say it is fair? Because as soon as the people say it's not fair, then actually they will send the courts, they will send the attorneys, they will send the prosecutors, and they will start finding people who were to blame. As we see now, that the Democrats have lost in the US elections, and now they're looking for people to blame. Biden didn't do what he should have done, blah, 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 blah. And the real answer is, the blame for a company lies with the board of directors, not with the managers, not with the shareholders. That is the key principle of corporate governance. So if I can go to the last three slides, actually last 4 slides. Let me go to the corporation. This is just repeating that the people who should worry about the company and its future are the board of directors, and everybody wants something from the company. That is very clear, which is the managers want more planes or higher wages, the suppliers want bigger margins, the government wants more taxes, and the owners want more dividends. So you have to choose and balance out the company. Next slide. And the risk in governance is that if you have too many owners, like General Electric, then de facto, the people who actually have all the power are not the board of directors, because they're too far, but the executives. And then the executives start running the company for their own views. And that is not necessarily the right thing, which is they will want higher pay. They will try to take advantage of the company. This is what happened in the Dutch East Indies companies. They were actually running the company for the money. And basically everybody is trying to milk the cow. I use this because I'm in Switzerland. Everybody milks the cow, but they take too much milk, and the milk, with the cows, it's also important to keep some milk for the young veals. And so there are no young veals, and the company disappears. And this is what happens a little bit for in General Electric, but certainly in the Dutch East Indies companies that I explained. The worst example, if I go to the next slide, the worst example, if you are owner manager or owner executive, which is you decide everything, you execute everything as well because you're a manager, and then the board, which is the bottom at the low, instead of being at the center, is really just an administration. It's like an administrator in a dictatorial regime, and all you can say is approve, approve, approve. So then the company is run for the owners, for the executives, and then the others might suffer. And this is, of course, why we can say Russia now, has an economy which is the size of Spain. Now, Russia is a great country, culture, history, and also, in terms of science, etc. But economically today, the corporations have not done well. The owners have done well. The oligarchs have done well. The oligarchs basically are pretty much dominated together with the governments. But they don't run the companies for the people. And I think that is what corporate governance tries to address. And I would say, if you go to the next slide, and these are bad governance examples. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple because he was partly too revolutionary, too innovative, but also because he wanted to have more innovation, but he didn't make the cash. Actually, the fact that he was fired by the board was a good thing, because when he came back with Next, and then he built Apple 2.0, which is the Apple we know now, or Apple maybe now is 3.0. But many of the things that Apple did were very much started with Steve Jobs 2.0. That was Steve Jobs number 1 was not a great guy, but Steve Jobs 2 was well governed. The middle guy is the guy who was responsible for Dieselgate. It's P, Mr. P, fantastic manager, but he became a crook. And then the third guy is the guy you followed on the news, fantastic guy, a genius, not such a stable genius like the other genius, but a genius. And the danger is that he runs the company for his own views. And the whole idea of corporate governance is to keep these people from becoming idiots, crooks, or people who destroy their companies. That's the whole idea of corporate governance. I cannot say it in a better picture. And I think let me finish with a final slide. I will leave the comment on democracy towards the end. Corporate governance, is actually a system of structures, relations, and people. It's very much people that decide. The governors are people, and it's the way corporations develop and give their best for society. And this has three parts, which is good structures, good laws, good shareholder agreements, good contracts, good charters, good relationships, people talking to each other, because we all make mistakes, and business is full of mistakes. One of the greatest managers, Sloan in the US said, if more than 50% of my decisions were good ones, I'll consider myself a great manager. And then it's about people, not working for themselves, but working for other people. And I think business is not there to make money for me. Business is there to create value for customers. It's also there to create value for governments through taxes. It's also to create value to suppliers. And so everybody is interested that this system of relationships and structures keeps going, so that everybody can benefit in a reasonable way. And that is the topic of corporate governance. How this is done, we will talk more into detail. Here I just presented the challenge and the why, not the how. So I try to motivate you what it is and why it is important. The how takes more time, and we will discuss in the class. Thank you. I hope this was clear.
Yes, and we have a question from Dana.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Dana.
In whose interests the board of directors should act? The company or the stakeholders? They don't match.
Yes, that is a great question again. Please keep asking questions. So the board of directors has a fiduciary duty not to one stakeholder, but to the corporation. So they should always do what is best for the corporation. And that is a judgment. That is like, in that sense, that is governance as judging. And the key question always for boards, when you appoint a CEO, when you agree to a lawsuit, when you acquire another company, is this in the interest of the corporation? Or is this in the interest of one shareholder, one oligarch? Or is this because the president takes advantage of the corporation? So it's a perfect question, and it summarizes corporate governance. The duty of board of directors is towards the corporation, what it is and what it can be. So the duty of the boards is try to make the corporation as good as it can be. So it only has one duty. It's called corporation, and that's why people call independence. They don't want people who are obeying to a stakeholder, to one stakeholder, because we need all the stakeholders in various degrees. And so that's why we say We want independent directors, but actually independent of the other stakeholders, but very dependent on the health of the corporation. Great. Fundamental question.
So thank you very much.
And many people don't understand that. They think they work for the shareholder. No, no, no. You work for the corporation. And but don't forget that, you know, the shareholder takes money out. He doesn't actually put some money in the beginning, but actually he milks the cow. So the real question is, it's about the cow, it's about the farm. It's not about, you know, the money that's given to the shareholder. But of course, you need to be fair with the shareholder as well. Yeah, you can show the picture. The only picture I will show on that one will be this one. So what's the relationship with democracy? Well, you know, you have the same thing in corporate governance. So democracy, liberal democracy, is a tripod. You have parliament, the people, and their representatives. You have on the right the executive power, the board of directors. This is the board of the government. And then you have the employees. This is the people who work in the ministries. And then you have the judges to make sure that when there is a fight between what the people want and what the directors want and the government wants, that this is a fair deal. Or you also have a court, which is if a minister is corrupt, then of course he should be prosecuted. And that is why justice is independent. Well, corporate governance is the same thing. On the left, you have the General Assembly of Shareholders. On the right, you have the board of directors. And in the middle, you have what is called the courts. These could be the commercial courts, could be, if there is a penal court, could be the civil courts. And it's also the accounting firms to make sure that the numbers are correct. So corporate governance also works on this tripod. So that's what I wanted to say. And so the culture of corporate governance is very much influenced by the culture of democracy, because corporate governance is about the freedom of corporations as moral, not as individual people, but as moral people, as communities. So great question.
And the next one from Madhyar. What do you think about the role of corporate secretary in corporate management?
Yes, I would say not so much in corporate management, but in corporate governance. So it's more the corporate secretary is a manager, but he's a manager, but he's an employee of the company. So he works for the corporation. He shouldn't work for the chairman of the board. He shouldn't work for, you know, the shareholder. He works for the company. And I would say, you guys are so good, you know, it's a key person, because many directors don't understand governance. So having a great company secretary is fundamental to good governance. And there is an institution in the UK that is called the Institute of Chartered Corporate Secretaries. I think corporate secretaries, I would say, do not seem to have a lot of power, but they are fundamental, because you know, a bad corporate secretary basically makes a board bad. It's very hard to have a great board without having a great corporate secretary. So I think this is a fundamental question. It's a key agent. I wouldn't call him a coach of a soccer team. If you think of the soccer team if you think of the directors as a soccer team, you couldn't call him a coach because he doesn't have that power necessarily, but he also has the role of a coach. And so fundamental, yes, excellent.
So, Luda, thank you very much for this presentation. We will pass some slides, but
I think we have done this. So
we'll send it to our participants later. And let me introduce the course, our mutual course with INSEAD and Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. I will say some words in Russian. Дорогие участники, мы очень гордимся как чаптер Zero Kazakhstan нашим сотрудничеством с бизнес-школой INSEAD. И у нас есть разработка, есть курс, который мы назвали Boards Climate Journey. И мы хотели бы представить вам наш курс. Я хочу вам сказать, что для того, чтобы вы полностью экран видели, я вам могу предложить свернуть немного иконки. Для этого вот на верхней панели над иконками можно нажать вот на черточку, и тогда вам будет виден полный слайд. Итак, наш курс, он состоит из 3 основных модулей. Первый модуль, который начинается буквально в декабре, это курс на онлайн-платформе, посвященный климату. Мы сейчас в Казахстане делаем буквально первые шаги в этом направлении, поэтому это фактически климатическая грамотность. То есть мы расскажем то, что совет директоров должен знать про климат для того, чтобы принимать взвешенные решения. Дело в том, что климат сейчас – это и риски, и возможности, и это нужно понимать. Рынок меняется, он меняется в том числе из-за климатических аспектов. Дальше у нас будет модуль международный во Франции, Фонтенбло, который будет преподавать Люда и его коллеги. Он чуть позже расскажет буквально через слайд об этом модуле. И дальше в мае у нас будет завершение этого обучения в Астане, где будет локальный модуль, посвященный зеленым финансам. Мы говорили о том, что климат – это не только риски, но и возможности. И также у нас будет климатическая игра для того, чтобы можно было окончательно все аспекты, связанные с климатом, разложить по полочкам и разобраться на практике, что это такое, даже если ваша компания сейчас делает буквально первые шаги. И также Люда приедет к нам сюда, в Астану, для того, чтобы сделать follow-up сессию. Это все будет происходить офлайн. У нас 2 офлайн модуля, один во Франции, один в Астане, и онлайн-модуль, который начнется в декабре. Динара, я попрошу дать ссылочку на то, чтобы люди могли оставить заявку на этот курс. Отвечу на вопрос, для кого это обучение. Это для действующих членов советов директоров и для тех, кто хотел бы ими стать, кто сейчас уже продумывает для себя карьеру директора, члена совета директоров, независимого директора или члена совета директоров. Значит, что у нас будет в климатическом модуле? Этот модуль будет на русском языке онлайн. Что-то будет в формате видеолекции, что-то будет в формате презентации текстов. Это 5 основных модулей, которые требуют от нас Climate Governance Initiative. Это стандартизированные курсы с таким сертификатом, с такими знаниями. Вы фактически на мировом уровне будете понимать, что такое климатическая повестка сейчас. Luda, could you please explain us about Fontainebleau model? Luda, are you here?
Sorry. Yes, so this is where we will talk more about the how. So what are the challenges? I should say that, you know, the key in corporate governance is experience, competence, and talent. And so one of the questions, of course, is you cannot train great directors in 3 days, but you can help people understand the governance mindset, which is very different from the execution mindset. So execution is doing. Governing is actually framing. It's having a vision, putting a challenge up. And so the worst thing is, for example, you know, a challenge might be go and get rid of this person, you know, and then how do you get rid of people? That's execution. But the first question is, should I get rid of this person? For example, if you look at the US elections, you know, you could think of it as the previous CEO had been fired, Mr. Trump, and then he's replaced by the new CEO, Biden. You know? And then the key message is of the old CEO was, you know, this wouldn't have happened under me. I would have done much better. Well, factually, you know, Mr. Trump didn't run in his first term such a great presidency. He created a lot of chaos, you know, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, etc. He reduced the alliance and then the partnership. So Biden did actually a good question. And in a certain way, corporate governance is to basically say, you know, it shouldn't be the shareholders who decide, the voters. It should be people who actually understand what the corporation is about. And then the key question for the board of directors is, you know, would the previous CEO have done better over the last 4 years? If he had done better, then I think we should appoint him and maybe fire the current CEO. But if we're not clear that the previous CEO who was there 4 years ago would have done better under the last 4 years, then we shouldn't be. So that is the principle of corporate governance, which is we do not, in that sense, and this is a good question, corporate governance is not like voting. You vote for the directors, but the directors decide. So it's, in that sense, it's much more like the Justice Department than it is the voting for the president. So I think that's we're trying to debunk some myths and challenges, myths that corporate governance doesn't matter, that is just bureaucracy. And then I think we work on the last slide that I think we worked on, which is the structures, the hardware. That is, you know, on day 2. On day 1, we look at the software. How do you have honest conversations? Because if you don't have honest conversations, you're not going to have good governance, and you're not going to have good management or good execution. And then the people, which is what kind of people do you need? The people who are good at execution, the generals, are not necessarily good directors. So we finish by saying that that is the finish on day 2. Governance is not just a board of directors. It's working, is the collaboration between the directors who are responsible for the corporation, the managers who manage the corporation and do the progress, and then the shareholders who actually are the ultimate judges on the board, because the boards don't decide by themselves. They're not tyrants. The boards have to be accountable to shareholders. Now, the problem is the system hasn't worked because we're all getting fried. That is the issue of climate change. Spain might soon become a desert. We've already seen 200 dead people in Valencia, you know, because of the storms. That is actually the government not being responsible. And that is actually bad governance by the government, because, you know, they even when the water was rising in Valencia, even then the government didn't say stay home, get out, you know. No, they let it go until in the evening. So the last day is basically, how do you change governance as a system for the corporation and the shareholder to a system for the stakeholders? And that is what is meant by Chapter 0, which is the earth is a stakeholder. Why? Because we take advantage of the earth. Many companies profit, like oil companies, they profit from the earth. And the real question is, okay, they profit once, but we're not going to replenish the oil. But we do replenish the water. We do replenish the harvest. So a lot of things in the earth are replenishable, but we are abusing them. And we are exceeding through chemicals, technology. We're basically exploiting the earth. And what happens is the earth is telling us, you know, you can't keep going like this. So this, of course, should be solved for the earth by governments and by the United Nations. But, you know, if the United Nations cannot solve the Gaza issue, why do we think it's going to solve the climate change issue? So we have a lot of work to do. I do feel that I think governance is much better started at the national level and not at the international level, at the global level. And in that sense, I think it will be easier for China to become a great sustainability player because it is of the interest in China. I think the US is very far away with Trump from that issue. That's going to be a very big issue over the next 4 years, because US is one of the big polluters in the world through the corporations. And you have a denier as a president. So that is going to be a problem. I think this is an area where the European Union has done well, but the real problem is, in order to pay attention to the stakeholders, you may actually make less money in the short run because you need to invest. And so that comes at the expense of the shareholders. And that is where shareholders, especially in the US, say, I don't like it. And that is the key governance issue, which is balancing the short term with the long term. So capitalism is under question. The main reason is because it has worked so well, but it has also worked unfairly. And that is what Chapter 0 and ESG and triple bottom line is all about. So this is also not doing corporate governance the old way, but it's doing corporate governance the modern way, which is looking at corporations as social institutions. And are we doing good? Are we doing good? Or are we doing good at the expense of some stakeholders? And normally most people would say is you should do business without doing harm. You should live your life without doing harm to your neighbors. The same thing should be true for corporations as well.
So thank you very much for your attention to climate. And I will speak in Russian. Это пример сертификата, который получают участники курса в конце. Он будет как в диджитал формате, так и в физическом формате. Так что любой человек, который захочет проверить, провалидировать ваш сертификат на специальном сайте, сможет это сделать. So, Luda, could you please tell us a little bit about options for alumni? Luda?
The answer is not just coming once to INSEAD, but it's also about after INSEAD, what are you going to do within your context? If you're a company secretary, what are you doing in the board? If you're a board member, what are you doing? If you're not a board member, how come you're not a board member? You can be a board member of a hospital, of a school, of a startup. So what we're going to do is actually come back to you, and at the end to look at your exam, which is the real exam, is what have you done with it? Have you changed something? Because governance is for impact. It's not check the boxes. It's actually for impact. And I think from that and sharing what the various students, hopefully 20, 25, 30, what the various students will do. And that's what we will do at the final session.
Okay. Это примеры вебинаров, которые...
And then maybe, Natalia, I can say a little bit about this, which is if you join it, then you will also be invited to these to an ongoing discussion about corporate governance, and that will be interesting because you will hear, I think INSEAD is the most international business schools, and so you will hear about corporate governance in Singapore, in the US, and you will hear and continue to be educated, because the people who need to learn the most are actually the board members, because they always have to prepare the future. And as we know in AI, a lot of things are changing. So board members need to be good students. So I think that's part of the invitation as well.
Thanks. So, Luda, why are you happy about INSEAD? Please tell us.
Oh, because INSEAD is a school for minorities. I was raised as a French-speaking Flemish guy, and I was punished in school because I was French-speaking. I had to go to say I will not speak French in the courtyard and things like that. So what I like about INSEAD is two things. Everybody can be a minority. So you can be yourself. You don't have to fit a certain pattern. And then over the 30 years, 25 years, soon 30 years, that I have been at INSEAD, I've seen the world change just by seeing my classes change. So INSEAD is a great place because you keep going to INSEAD, but the MBA class or the class today is not the class it was 30 years ago. So INSEAD keeps changing, and I think in that sense, it's sort of it's the business school for the world. But I don't call it the business school for the world because that's very arrogant. But I would say it's a business school from the world and for the world, which is we're actually extracting people from their regional context in order to come to INSEAD and reflect on the world and also how they influence the world. And that's why I like INSEAD very much, because it keeps me in touch with the world.
Okay, let's the next slides about INSEAD. And so, thank you very much. What about the prices? Я расскажу немножко про цены. Для тех, кто успеет присоединиться к нам до 1 декабря, цена 12 900. Что это включает? Это включает все 3 модуля, участие во всех 3 модулях. Модуль во Франции будет включать в себя перевод, такой же, как вот вы слышали сегодня, и питание на кампусе и во Франции, и во время обучения, которое будет проходить в Астане. До 20 декабря это 13 900. Вы можете сделать предоплату в размере 3000 евро и доплатить потом остаток до указанной даты. В чате у нас есть информация по тому, как можно оставить заявку. Я еще раз ее скопировала. Можете оставить заявку, если у вас есть какой-то вопрос, мы с вами свяжемся и все детали с вами обсудим. Спасибо большое. Thank you very much, Luda, for this evening. It was delightful. I wrote down few. I wrote down a lot of много мыслей, которые были сегодня здесь. So thank you very much. Дорогие друзья, спасибо вам большое за участие, и мы в скором времени пришлем вам запись.
And I know a word of Russian, спасибо, that I learned in Ukraine, but it's about the only word. So спасибо, mucho спасибо.
A lot of thank you for you, Luda, in our chat. So thank you very much. До свидания.
And I hope we can get a higher proportion of Kazakhstan. You know, I had a great student, Koligash. I hope to have more Kazakhs because INSEAD belongs to you as well, or INSEAD should belong to you.